Lori Vallow Daybell has been extradited back to Idaho. Where does that leave the Doomsday Mom after all her beliefs, trials, and life sentences? That's the question haunting true crime followers across America. After years of trials, convictions, and shocking courtroom behavior, Lori's legal saga is still unfolding. But this latest development, her return to Idaho, marks a new chapter, and perhaps the final one. Today, we're not just revisiting another headline. We're breaking down how this extradition fits into the bigger picture, why states pursued separate prosecutions, and what this case teaches us about justice, accountability, and closure. If you're here for clarity, not sensationalism, subscribe to Behind Closed Doors. Because here, we don't just talk about crime. We learn from it. Let's go back to 2023. Lori Vallow Daybell was convicted in Idaho for the murders of her two youngest children, Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow, and for conspiring in the death of her husband's first wife, Tammy Daybell. The sentencing was clear: life in prison without parole. That should have been the end. But this case has never been simple. Behind Lori's crimes was a bizarre set of doomsday beliefs, ideas about chosen missions, light and dark spirits, and an apocalyptic destiny. These weren't just eccentric thoughts. They fueled a string of deaths, from children to spouses, all wrapped in cult-like obsession. Idaho's trial gave families and communities some closure. Yet the legal process wasn't over. Because other states had their own charges waiting. Fast forward to 2025. Arizona prosecutors filed charges against Lori for conspiracy to commit murder in two separate cases. The victims, her estranged husband Charles Vallow, and her niece's ex-husband, Brandon Boudreaux. Why pursue more charges when Lori was already serving life in Idaho? The answer lies in how justice works across jurisdictions. Each state has the right, and the responsibility, to prosecute crimes that happened within its borders. Arizona didn't just want Lori behind bars. They wanted accountability for their victims too. That decision carried weight. It meant more trials, more taxpayer expense, and more time before Lori's saga reached any kind of resolution. But it also meant that if one conviction ever collapsed on appeal, others would still stand. Some people question the need. Why spend money on a trial if she's never getting out? But the truth is, every victim deserves their own day in court. Charles Vallow and Brandon Boudreaux were not side notes. Their lives, and their violent deaths, mattered. By pursuing separate charges, Arizona made sure those stories were heard. Families testified. Evidence was presented. And Lori faced judgment in another courtroom, not just for what happened in Idaho, but for the full scope of her crimes. There's another angle, too. Appeals happen. They may not always succeed, but they can drag on for years. Having multiple convictions in multiple states makes it nearly impossible for a defendant to walk free, even if one ruling is ever overturned. This is why prosecutors go the distance. Not for spectacle, not for redundancy, but to close every possible crack in the system. If you're watching this and wondering how to apply the lesson, here's what this teaches us. When crimes cross state lines, or when suspects commit offenses in more than one jurisdiction, you'll often see layered prosecutions. It's not inefficiency, it's insurance. It ensures no single verdict carries the entire weight of justice. And it respects the voices of all victims, not just some. By mid-2025, Arizona's cases against Lori had reached their climax. Guilty verdicts came down, and sentencing was about to follow. But before we get there, it's worth pausing to see how far this case had traveled. From Idaho in 2023, to Arizona in 2025, Lori Vallow's journey through the courts wasn't just a legal process, it was a reminder of how far systems will go to pursue justice for every victim, even when one sentence would seem to be enough. In June of 2025, during her Arizona trial, Lori Vallow Daybell reminded the world that she wasn't done causing drama in the courtroom. Representing herself, she decided to challenge the judge directly. The argument? over whether certain pieces of character evidence should be allowed. When she pushed too far, the judge warned her. When she kept going, she was removed from the courtroom. For most defendants, being expelled from their own trial would be humiliating. For Lori, it was another moment of defiance, another attempt to control the narrative. But trials aren't temples for belief. They're arenas for evidence. And judges won't bend the rules just because a defendant feels entitled to them. Self-representation can look like power. But in reality, it strips away safeguards. When defendants ignore the rules, they don't strengthen their case, they weaken it. That same summer, the Arizona jury found Lori guilty of 2 separate conspiracy charges: conspiring to kill her estranged husband, Charles Vallow, and conspiring in the attempt on her niece's ex-husband, Brandon Boudreaux. In July 2025, Lori received 2 more life sentences, to be served consecutively. This meant that even though she was already facing life in Idaho, Arizona stacked their sentences on top. The message was clear: Lori would never walk free. And if, somehow, one state's conviction was overturned, the other would stand as a barrier. But this came at a cost. Arizona spent nearly $100,000 detaining, transporting, and trying Lori for these cases. For some taxpayers, that figure raised eyebrows. Why pour money into a trial when she was already guaranteed to spend the rest of her life in prison? Here's the answer. Trials aren't just about locking someone away. They're about acknowledging every victim. Charles Vallow and Brandon Boudreaux deserved their day in court. Their families deserved to hear evidence laid bare, and to see Lori face judgment for those crimes, not just the ones in Idaho. With her Arizona sentences secured, Lori was prepared for her next move, not by choice, but by law. On August 18, 2025, she was extradited back to Idaho, to the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center to continue serving her multiple life sentences. Extradition isn't just paperwork. It's a carefully coordinated process between states. Arizona had completed its part. Now custody shifted back to Idaho, ensuring Lori serves her time where her original life without parole sentence was handed down. For Lori, this meant moving from one maximum security environment to another. For Arizona taxpayers, it meant relief: the cost of housing her was no longer theirs. And for the justice system, it meant consistency. The states had done their jobs, one after another, ensuring every conviction was in place. It may seem simple: one state hands over an inmate to another. But extradition has deep importance. It symbolizes the way states share responsibility when crimes cross borders. It ensures sentences don't just sit on paper, they're actively enforced. And it shows families that justice doesn't stop with one conviction, it moves forward until every charge has been resolved. Justice is often portrayed as one big trial, one dramatic verdict. But in reality, it's a chain. Every state, every charge, every sentence is a link. Together, they form something stronger than any single verdict could provide. So, where does this leave Lori now? She sits in Idaho, under multiple life sentences from 2 different states. She's been convicted of murdering her children, conspiring in the death of Tammy Daybell, conspiring in the death of Charles Vallow, and conspiring in the attempt on Brandon Boudreaux. Her saga has stretched across states, across years, and across belief systems that twisted into violence. But there's still more to say. Because even with her sentences secure, there are questions about appeals, parole, and the looming case of her current husband, Chad Daybell, who still faces the death penalty in Idaho. So now that Lori Vallow Daybell has been extradited back to Idaho, what comes next? The short answer: not much freedom, and very little chance of change. Legally, Lori still has the right to file appeals. But appeals are not retrials. They don't reweigh evidence or call new witnesses. They focus on whether the original trial followed proper procedures. And with Lori's cases spanning 2 states and resulting in multiple life sentences, her odds are slim. Parole? That's not on the table. Idaho sentenced her to life without the possibility of parole. Arizona's sentences are consecutive, stacking on top. Lori's reality is a prison cell for the rest of her life. But the story isn't entirely finished. Lori's current husband, Chad Daybell, still awaits his own trial in Idaho. He faces the death penalty for his role in the conspiracy and deaths tied to this case. For viewers, this raises an important contrast. Lori's fate is sealed with life sentences. Chad's fate could mean execution if convicted. The courts will have to determine whether his belief system and involvement mirror Lori's, and whether his punishment should be different. Even when co-defendants share the same ideology, the justice system treats each case individually. Different charges, different roles, different outcomes. What can we learn from the Lori Vallow Daybell saga, beyond the headlines? First, cult-driven crimes can end in courtrooms. Beliefs that feel untouchable in communities, whether doomsday prophecies, spiritual visions, or manipulative teachings, still have limits when they turn violent. Courts don't prosecute belief. They prosecute action. Second, state coordination matters. Without Arizona stepping in, Charles Vallow and Brandon Boudreaux's cases might have been footnotes. Instead, they were acknowledged, tried, and judged on their own merits. Justice wasn't left in the hands of one state alone, it was shared. Third, justice costs money. Arizona taxpayers spent close to $100,000 to bring Lori to trial. That's a real price. But trials are about more than punishment. They're about recording truth, hearing testimony, and giving families closure. When you add up the costs of ignoring such crimes, the value of accountability becomes even clearer. Finally, justice is slow, but steady. From 2020 investigations, to 2023 convictions, to 2025 extraditions, this saga stretched over years. And while that may feel frustrating, it also shows how justice builds, case by case, charge by charge, until the cracks are closed. So where does that leave the Doomsday Mom? Behind prison walls in Idaho, serving life without parole, her doomsday prophecies silenced, her control over others gone. She will never walk free. For the families of Tylee, JJ, Charles, Tammy, and Brandon, there will never be complete healing. But there is closure. Multiple trials, multiple verdicts, and multiple life sentences ensure Lori Vallow Daybell is held accountable for every life she helped destroy. And for the rest of us, there are lessons, about belief, about justice, and about how systems work together when one verdict isn't enough. Justice can feel endless. It can look like trial after trial, year after year, headline after headline. But even when it drags, even when it costs money, it eventually builds into something unshakable. That's the story of Lori Vallow Daybell. Not just the cult, not just the courtroom drama, but the slow, steady march of accountability. What part of this story haunts you the most? Is it the cult beliefs? The murders of children? Or the long, expensive legal process it took to bring closure? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I read every reply. And if you want fast, clear updates on the cases you already follow, subscribe to Behind Closed Doors. Because here, we don't just talk about crime. We learn from it.